In this video, I'll go over my top 45 wide receiver rankings, every wide receiver, every single matchup with statistics and data to back it up for week 11. If you do want to have a statistical advantage over all of your friends for the remainder of the fantasy football season, hit that subscribe button and like the video while you are down there. It would help me out a ton. And make sure to stick around to the end of the video because after the tier rankings, I will give you a quick list of hidden gem players we can start that are deep league sleepers but can get you some good fantasy points this week. But I don't waste time. The number one guy in the S tier here is going to be Ja'Marr Chase. Coming off a huge game last week, we all know what happened. Don't need to go over that more than it already is. Now coming into a matchup here against the Chargers, which is a tougher one as far as fantasy points allowed to wide receivers goes, but the Bengals are not here to mess around. They are going to pass, they're going to dominate this game, and they're going to try to make a statement win because they need to fight for playoffs, and they need to fight for their own dignity at this point as well. But Nico Collins is going to be the wide receiver 2 coming off IR, the first week off that, coming out here without Stephon Diggs anymore into this offense. He is clearly the wide receiver 1. This entire offense is elevated so much more when he is healthy. It is a positive matchup as well. But the wide receiver 3 is going to be Justin Jefferson in a tougher matchup here against the Titans defense, simply because you don't have to pass on them. Yes, their secondary has been playing good, but when you play the Tennessee Titans, you're not necessarily in a shootout type of game. If the interception ratio continues for Sam Darnold, 5 interceptions out of the last 2 games, it's going to bring down his upside, but still easily a top 5 wide receiver. Dropping it down to the A tier, we start here with George Pickens and Amon-Ra. You'd think Pickens is high, but he gets another great matchup this week against the Ravens, which we just saw Ja'Marr Chase go for over 50 fantasy points on them. With Amon-Ra, the numbers aren't as good as they have been in previous seasons. He's the wide receiver 46 in routes run per game, the wide receiver 23 in targets per game, and the wide receiver 32 in receiving yards per game. But he's still the wide receiver 8 in target share at almost 30%, wide receiver 9 in red zone targets, and his touchdowns especially have been saving him this year, 7 in 7 straight games. And he gets a dream matchup against the Jaguars this week, so regardless of how many targets he actually gets, the targets are going to be valuable. It'll probably be in the red zone, and he will be a good fantasy football option for you. With Puka and Garrett Wilson here, Devontae Adams as well tied up with them. We do get Puka in a positive matchup against the Patriots as long as they don't blow them out too early. He is coming off a bye week though, so the wide receiver 5 in air yards is going to be very positive for him, especially in the opportunity that he will see this week. With Wilson and the Jets with Devontae Adams, they'll get to continue to push their offense the way they want to with their playmakers. That's just kind of the way they run their offense in general, but this should be a get-right game for them against an easier Colts defense. They allow a ton of big plays. Their corners aren't necessarily amazing, but you look at what they did last week against the Arizona Cardinals with even worse corners, and it was really nothing. So it is a little bit more risky on a week-to-week basis, but I do expect them to put together a little bit more of a football game here, and it should be a pass-first script for them. Moving it down to the B tier, though, we're going to be starting to see some red flags here with Deebo Samuel and CeeDee Lamb. Deebo hasn't had the highest target share in which you want this year, but he gets back to a regular level of snaps after injury, which is going to be positive for him and allow him to see more opportunities. Now getting a positive matchup against the Seahawks that should be pass-first and enough scoring on both sides for him to be viable. He does get a little bit, the smallest bit of a downside because Christian McCaffrey is back in this offense, but not enough to move him down these rankings too far. CeeDee Lamb, despite less than 100 total passing yards last week, still finished with 10 targets. Not the best fantasy day, but the Cowboys couldn't put it together at all in the first game without Dak. Their second game, you'd think they can do a little bit more in the pass game. Tyreek next. We really haven't seen the Tyreek that we've expected coming into a very negative matchup here against the Raiders. It's worrisome because, again, like the Tennessee Titans, you don't necessarily have to rain pass volume on them because their defense isn't that amazing and they don't really stay in games that much. So if he can get his usage before that happens and before a potential blowout, he'll be startable. But then we get Cooper Kupp followed by Drake London and DK Metcalf here. Kupp, again, like Puka, getting the Patriots matchup, which is a good one. In his healthy games this year, he's the wide receiver 5 in target share and routes run per game and air yards per game. So he's going to be a fine guy. Drake London, still a top guy in targets per game. The Broncos is a more neutral matchup, a little bit more on the negative side, but with the way the Bo Nix and the Broncos have been playing, it's not necessarily a huge potential of being a blowout to where he won't get a ton of usage in the third and fourth quarter. With DK in his first matchup off injury and the bye week, he gets the 49ers, which is a tougher matchup on the week, but he should get enough routes. He's the wide receiver 1 in routes run per game, and this offense is first in passing volume, so he should be perfectly fine. I don't have any worries coming off this injury. It doesn't look like he's going to be limited. But dropping it down to the C tier, we have T. Higgins, Courtland Sutton, and Zay Flowers. Finally, Higgins is off the injury report and actually ready to go for a game. It is a tougher matchup, again, against the Chargers, but when you have Ja'Marr Chase on one side of the football and T. Higgins on the other side of the field, he's going against the second toughest coverage. I've talked about this a lot. He's going to eat, which is why he's the wide receiver 5 in targets per game. As for Courtland Sutton, he gets a top 10 matchup here against the Falcons. His target share has been elite as of late, since week 8 especially, which is why he's this high in the rankings. Nix is 10th in passing attempts, which is going to give this offense and the receivers specifically a bunch of opportunities and upside in this matchup to where they're probably going to have to be playing a little bit of catch-up or at least stick to that pass-heavy script. Speaking of risk, though, Zay Flowers is next here simply because he is game script dependent, at least so we thought. last week. Even when Lamar Jackson had over 30 passing attempts and almost 300 yards, he's still pretty hard to trust. Now he's getting a negative matchup against the Steelers defense, which might honestly be the most cohesive defensive unit in the NFL, so there is some risk there. Jaden Reed, Ladd McConkey next in the C tier. Very negative matchups for Reed against the Bears and Jalen Johnson. He is a nightmare. He does not allow a ton of points to fantasy football wide receivers. This game could get out of hand against the Bears. They do have a new offensive coordinator, so maybe their offense looks a little bit better, but the Packers could get up early and just stick to a run-heavy script if the Bears can't keep this close. Ladd McConkey, a very down game last week, but again, he did play the Titans defense, which is a negative matchup. We expect that to be a little bit different in this matchup here. Herbert should have a ton of pass volume against the Bengals, so that's only going to give him more upside. Going through and looking at the D tier, we start with Calvin Ridley and Jauan Jennings. Ridley had a great game last week. He did have 100% of Will Levis's passing touchdowns, which was all 2 of them. I don't really expect that to happen again. Number 1, Will Levis for 2 passing touchdowns. Number 2, for Calvin Ridley to get all of them in the offense, but it is a pass-first script against the Vikings this week, so you'd hope that Levis can keep the passing volume there and give him some upside as well. But Jauan Jennings, nothing short of amazing so far this year. Without Brandon Ayuk, he's leading this team in first read target share right now. An extremely positive matchup coming this week in Week 11 against the Buccaneers, who can't stop anybody. They are top 5 in points allowed to wide receivers this year, so you have to be going through and starting him. Jacoby Myers next up, tied with Tank Dell. Myers with Minshew is coming off a bye in an interesting matchup here. He should be able to get the volume. Regardless of who he's playing with at quarterback, though, he's been very, very positive. It is a tough matchup against the Dolphins defense, which is bottom 5 in points allowed to wide receivers. Nico Collins is returning for Houston, which doesn't necessarily mean bad things for Tank Dell. His target share really hasn't changed if you look at his numbers with and without him, so I'm not too worried about him. If anything, it can open up this offense and allow him to not take the number 1 coverage. Following that with DeAndre Hopkins and Cedric Tillman, Hopkins has been a bit more of a risk than people want to say he is because of that almost 30-point fantasy game he had 2 weeks ago. He is playing about 65% of the snaps on average. He is the wide receiver 1, and when you have Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback, you really can't count him out too much. But Tillman has had an elite target share over the past few weeks without Amari Cooper and Jameis Winston in this offense. He's averaging over 10 targets a game. That's a top 10 wide receiver in that statistic. Now he's getting a matchup against the Saints, who are beat up on defense and have no Marshawn Lattimore. He should continue to see volume. The question is, what can he do with it in this matchup here? But in the E tier, we're going to be moving with Darnell Mooney against the Broncos. A neutral matchup as long as it doesn't get out of hand. The underlying numbers for him, again, have been amazing. The Falcons wide receiver 2, he's not acting like that if you look at the numbers. But DJ Moore, he does probably most likely get a boost with a change at offensive coordinator. But with all the wide receiver competition in this offense, it's really hard to predict who's going to be this number 1. He is the best wide receiver they have on their team, though. I expect it to be him, but we will see with this offensive coordinator change. It should be a pass-first matchup for them. JSN is another wide receiver here. When everybody in this offense is healthy, he does get bumped down. With that, I mean DK Metcalf, but again, it's a pass-first matchup against the 49ers. It's a tough defense, but the Seahawks are number 1 in passing attempts. Shakir gets a little bit of an increase here without Keon Coleman in this lineup, but it is against one of, if not the toughest matchups in the entire NFL against the Chiefs. They don't allow a lot of points to wide receivers. Following that with Jalen Waddle and Brian Thomas Jr., they both have clear downsides, but can be flex options if you do need them. And then I'll go ahead and put the F and G tier wide receivers here. If you have any questions about them, let me know in the comments. I will be answering as many start sits as I possibly can. But I want to make sure to leave time for these hidden gem guys that we do need to be starting because everybody needs a little bit of help, especially with all the injuries and bye weeks coming up. So if you need a tight end, Dawson Knox can be that guy. We all know Kincaid has officially been ruled out for this matchup because of his knee injury. He's not going to be playing, but it is a tough one against the Chiefs. They allow no points to anybody except the tight ends. They are very, very vulnerable to tight end fantasy points allowed, especially considering we already don't have Keon Coleman ruled out for this matchup. Amari Cooper is dealing with a wrist injury. He is questionable. There's no say that he's not on a snap restriction. Dawson Knox has been in this offense before, and the offense, again, is very, very good, very, very positive and effective. And in his healthy games starting for Dawson Knox, he's been averaging over 10 fantasy points a game in that aspect. So we can expect him to be the primary red zone target. He was previous years for Josh Allen. He might not have the highest target share, but that utilization in the red zone is what keeps him amazing. I know we can all remember that from previous years before Kincaid was drafted. Now, again, the Chiefs matchup is tough, but the wide receivers are a lot more negative than the tight ends. He should be able to eat because why would the Chiefs run a scheme for him when you have other playmakers? He should be out and open. But somehow Travis Etienne is going to be a start in our starting lineup this week. It's a very tough matchup against the Lions. We cannot take that away. Bottom 5 in points allowed to running backs, but we're not going to have Tank Bigsby in this offense, which is going to allow Travis Etienne to really be the bell cow guy because you can't expect Dearness Johnson to get much usage. Even in this game, if it gets out of hand, Travis Etienne gets enough usage in the receiving game and runs a ton of routes to where I won't be worried. Yes, we do have Mac Jones in this offense, but in Mac Jones' healthy games in 2023 with the Patriots, he averaged 7 targets a game to the running back position. Travis Etienne is more of a receiving running back than he is rushing, but even when he's got 10 rushing attempts at least a game so far this season and in previous years, his efficiency is good, and he's averaging over 3.5 yards per carry. So this could be a get-right game for him. It is a very negative matchup though, but he should still be in starting lineups. Quentin Johnson is another guy we can go through and start in the lineups here. He gets a matchup against the Bengals, which is going to be everything for him because they are a ton of offense and not much defense. They're going to be on the field, rolling out offense. We saw what Ja'Marr Chase did to the Ravens last week. There is no shortage of offense for them, and they're making statements. They need a playoff spot. They need to prove to themselves that they can do it, and that means the Chargers are going to have to play catch up and pass a ton to keep up with that, which is good for Quentin Johnson, a deep downfield touchdown threat kind of guy. And you look at his numbers this year, he's had a huge drop problem for his entire career of last year. That's not really the case this year. And the Chargers pass volume as of the last 3-4 weeks has been up a ton from the beginning of the season. You can expect that to continue against the Cincinnati Bengals. They don't have a great secondary. They also allow a ton of points. This is a spot where we can take that risk for him. Ladd McConkey also gets a boost because of that. But that is going to finish off this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Shout out to the man above, and I will see you in the next video on Monday coming for the waiver wire ads.